Hello, my name is Randy. I'm known on the internet as the Dema Tutor. I'm known for drafting on Magic Arena, but today we're going to do something different. I'm posting a video on how to draft my new favorite card game, Star Wars Unlimited. So I've gone to a few in-person draft events, and I'm meeting a lot of people who are drafting for the first time. This is the first time maybe they got into a card game, but they're just really into Star Wars and they want to learn. And so this video is dedicated to folks who want to learn how to draft Star Wars Unlimited, so that you have a basic understanding of strategy, so that when you go to your next draft event, you have an idea of what's going on. Now, I don't know when you'll be watching this, but this video will be focused more on the very first set of Star Wars Unlimited, Spark of the Rebellion, but hopefully the ideas that you learn here will apply to future sets of Star Wars as well. Okay. Now, to start out, we're going to talk about the rules for Star Wars Unlimited Draft. Right? So we first start out by giving each player 3 booster packs. And by the way, the draft pods are usually about 8 players, 6 to 8 players each. Okay? Now, each pack that each player will receive will contain 1 leader, 1 base, and 14 standard cards. And the draft will be conducted in 2 phases. The first phase is known as the leader draft. So what you're going to do is you will open up all 3 packs, and without looking at the other cards, you will remove each leader from each pack. Now you'll find the leader at the very top of the pack. It's the very first card that will be face up. So you grab the leader, you take it out, you put the rest of the cards, and you put it back into its wrapper. So you do that for all 3 packs. And out of those 3 leaders that you reveal, you will draft one of them. You will then pass the other 2 to your right. Of course, that means you will receive 2 leaders. Out of those 2 leaders, you will draft one of them, and then you will pass the last leader to your right. By the end of the leader draft, each player should have 3 leaders in their stable. So you get to choose one of those 3 leaders to build your deck around. Of course, you don't have to solidify which leader you have to choose. You can, you have all the way until deck building to finalize which leader you will want to use. Now, what's really important is that all leader draft information is public knowledge. So that is, you can see all the leaders that all the players in your pod, what they will get to choose from. You will also know what leaders the other players in your pod will have drafted. So that will be important information when we talk about how the strategy for drafting leaders. Now, once all the leaders have been drafted, we go into phase 2, is what I call the playables draft. Now, once all the leaders have been drafted, each person will then take one of their 3 open packs. You will remove the common base, which should be the new top card, face up. And then out of the 14 remaining playable cards, you may draft one of them. And then you're going to pass the remaining 13 cards to your left. So recall, for the leader draft, you are passing the leaders to your right. For the first pack, you'll be passing cards to your left. Okay, now from the 13 cards received from the player on your right, you're going to draft one of those cards and pass the remaining 12 to your left. So it's now going to be conducted like any other draft that you'll see. Okay, you're going to repeat that process until all 14 cards from pack 1 are drafted. Then, once that's done, you're going to take the second pack. You're going to repeat that process. You're going to take out the common base. You'll draft one of the cards, but this time you're going to pass the remaining cards back to your right. All right? You'll continue doing that until pack 2 is exhausted. And then you'll repeat the process again with the third pack. Take out the common base, draft a card, but now you're going to pass the cards to your left. So, just to review, leader draft, pass to your right. First pack, pass to your left. Second pack, pass to your right. Third pack, pass to your left. So right, left, right, left. And by the end of the playables draft, you should have 3 leaders in your stable and 42 playables to construct a minimum 30 card deck using 1 leader and 1 base. Now that base could either be a common base, and you have access to all the common bases, which are 30 HP, or you can use a rare base that you can draft in the playables phase. Now there are no limits to how many of the same card that can go into your deck, so you do not face the same restrictions as you would in Constructed, where you can only put 3 cards of the same name. If you drafted the card, you can put it in your deck. Okay, so now that you know the process of drafting, now we can talk about strategy, starting with what is the strategy for when you draft leaders. And I have one main rule. Ensure that you have at least 1 leader with heroism and 1 leader with villainy in your stable. Okay, now why is that? Because you can use any common base, you will have access to all the color aspects. So I define the 4 color aspects as blue, green, yellow, and red. You'll have those available at the start, okay? However, those bases do not provide what I call the alignment aspects. They don't provide heroism and they don't provide villainy. You can only get heroism and villainy aspects from your leaders. So it's really important that you have villainy and heroism represented among your leaders, okay? Because if you are shut out of heroism or you're shut out of villainy, you are basically cut off from drafting 1/3 of all the playables in the set. So not only does that get you into a lot of trouble in the playables draft if you're shut out of heroism or you're shut out of villainy, it's also not very fun. I think most of the fun out of draft is the idea that you could draft almost any card. So you want to make sure that you have leaders on both sides, heroism and villainy, to make sure that you are open to drafting any card, at least in pack 1. Now, an easy way to follow this rule is this, okay? Before you draft your first leader, make sure to look to the 2 players to your left. If the player immediately to your left has a majority of heroism leaders, or the player 2 spaces to your left has all heroism leaders, then you should draft a villainy leader for your first pick, right? And vice versa. If the person immediately to your left has a majority of villainy leaders to choose from, or the person 2 players to your left has all villainy leaders, then you should draft a heroism leader, all right? If you follow either of those rules, you're guaranteed that you'll have both villainy and heroism in your leader stable. Okay. So let's express this in an example, okay? So you're starting out the draft, and you've opened up your 3 packs. You have uncovered each of your leaders, and let's say you have Boba Fett, Director Krennic, and Jyn Erso to choose from, okay? You look immediately to your left, and you see that the player to your left has Sabine Wren, Grand Admiral Thrawn, and IG-88. So the question is, which leader should you draft? Well, if you see here, the player immediately to your left has 2 villainy leaders. So I think in most cases, you should choose Jyn Erso. Okay? By choosing Jyn Erso, you are guaranteed that you will have a villainy leader and a heroism leader. Okay? Now that said, there would be one exception. I would, in this in very few cases, I would choose Boba Fett, but only if only if the drafter 2 spaces to my left had all heroism leaders, right? Because if the player 2 spaces to your left has all heroism leaders, then you are guaranteed that the last leader that you're going to get will be heroism. So in that case, I could pick Boba Fett, knowing that I'm going to get a heroism leader at the very, very end. Okay? So that's a strategy for drafting leaders. Okay? Now, once you've drafted your leaders, now you go on to the playables draft. And before we talk strategy, we want to talk about like what makes a good draft card. Now, because it's a brand new game, there is a lot of overlap between what makes a good draft card and what makes a good card in constructed. However, there are a few caveats that you want to keep in mind. Okay? First off, you want to make sure that you're drafting cards that have an immediate impact on the board. These are cards that you don't need to build around to optimize. These are cards that are good on their own. So for example, a card that acts as removal, a card that is a unit that will buff another unit, etc. Now, I would also look for 2 of the 3 following qualities. I would look for a card that is good both early or late in the game, okay? I would also look for a card that either has ambush, sentinel, or restore. I focus on these 3 keywords because I feel like these keywords have the most immediate impact on the board. Ambush allows you to attack another unit, so essentially this cards with ambush, units that have ambush, can act as removal. And so being able to put a unit on the board while removing an opponent's unit is really powerful. I like Sentinel because it essentially acts as a blocker. It protects not only your base's health, but it also protects the other units. So you can think of a Sentinel unit as adding health to your base. Of course, your opponent might have Saboteur, but you know, maybe a third of the decks you're going to face, we focus on Saboteur, right? In most cases, though, Sentinel, again, will be able to protect your base and keep you in the game. Lastly, I also like Restore for the same reason I like Sentinel. It's a little bit slower because you do have to attack with the unit in order to get the Restore bonus, but it does help you keep you in the game. All right. Lastly, I look for cards that cost 5 resources or less, and this goes hand in hand with the idea of a card that is good, that is both good early and good late. If the card is not cheap, then it's not likely that card will be good in the early game. And so having the flexibility of having a cheap card also allows you to play that card if you have to play it off aspect, if it's that good of a card. So if the card is going to be expensive, then it better have a really, really good effect. Okay, and I do have some exceptions of expensive cards that I would try to probably pick maybe like 2nd or 3rd in the pack. Okay, now in this next section, I'm going to focus on good commons and uncommons. I mean, it goes without saying that a lot of the rares and legendaries that you're going to see are probably going to be more powerful than any common or uncommon that you see. So, you know, if you see pack one, pick one, and you see a Darth Vader unit, obviously you're going to draft it, or a Boba Fett, or a Luke Skywalker. Those are obvious. However, the majority of your decision making is going to be drafting commons and uncommons. Those are going to be the majority cards in your deck. And the key to winning a winning draft deck is making sure you have good synergies within your commons and uncommons, and making sure that you can pick the best commons and uncommons in your color aspects. And so we're going to talk about what my favorite commons and uncommons are that generally follow the points that I made in the earlier slide about what makes a good draft pick. So starting with blue, and I'm going to start out with the mono blue colors, since those colors, mono blue, the cards that have less aspects are probably going to have more competition because more of those cards are going to fit into more decks. And so we're going to start out with Takedown, a really good removal card at 4 resources. I also like System Patrol Craft, a 3/4 Sentinel. Since there are no Saboteur cards, Saboteur space units, a Sentinel in space can do a really great job helping fortify the space arena and protecting you from getting a huge amount of damage there. Okay. Now, out of blue villainy, I like Lieutenant Childzin, provided that you can get a lot of blue cards. Childzin can come out as a 4/4 or 5/5 with Sentinel. It's very solid at 4 resources. I also like Power of the Dark Side, another solid removal card. Then out of Blue Heroism, I like Canon Jarrus, a 4/5 that can heal on attack, and Yoda, a 2/4, but the Restore 2 is really valuable, and being able to draw a card when defeated can help you get to your big units. Drawing cards in draft is always a good thing. Moving on to green, I like Reinforcement Walker. This is one of my few exceptions. It's not cheap at 8 resources, but the fact that it allows you to draw and or heal your base from 3 damage, both when it's played and on attack, make it such a big threat that your opponent really has to answer. It's a really great bomb, so really like Reinforcement Walker. I also like Resupply, just being able to ramp into an extra resource, being able to deploy your leader 1 turn early is always really valuable. I also want to say honorable mention to Consortium Star Viper, the 3/3 in space that has Restore 2 when you have Initiative. That's also one of my favorite commons as well. Out of green villainy, I like Overwhelming Barrage. This is a card that I will play one-off aspect. I'm more than happy to play this at 7 resources. It can act essentially as a sweeper while buffing your unit. It's probably the best uncommon in the game. I also like Super Laser Technician for the same reason I like Resupply, helps you ramp. Out of green heroism, I like Bright Hope for the same reason that I like System Patrol Craft. It also gives you the option of being able to draw a card. And you have the Echo Base Defender, again, a 4/3 Sentinel, really, really solid. Moving on to yellow commons and uncommons, I really like Greedo, 3/1, as well as the When Defeated, which could possibly mean that you could deal 2 extra damage to a ground unit, which I think makes it the best 1-drop in the game. I also like Surprise Strike, to get a unit +3/+0 and attack, means that you can use this card both in the early game, if you want to get early damage, if you want to use it as a removal card to trade up, trade your 2/2 for a unit that has 5 toughness. So you can use it for attack or defense. I think it's an all-around great card. Yellow villainy, I like Bosk, 4/5 Ambusher, and when you get to play an event, you can deal 2 damage to another unit, really helps control the ground, and yellow has some really excellent events. Speaking of excellent events, I really like No Good to Me Dead as well. Exhaust unit, keeps that unit exhausted, really great target for leaders, which are pretty difficult to interact with. Out of yellow heroism, I like Azatec Liberator Gunship, a 3/4 Ambusher. Again, can act as removal, will take out most fighters in the game. As well as Rogue Operative, 2/4, but with Saboteur, and attacks as a 4/4. So if you're playing with an aggro deck, a 4/4 attacker at 3 cost is really good value, and is a threat that the opponent really has to address. Okay. Moving on to red, I like Partisan Insurgent. It's a 1/4, but with another red unit, it will attack as a 3/4. Those are really great stats for 2 resources. I also like Open Fire. Dealing 4 damage to a unit will take out most commons and uncommons, and so a removal card at 3 resources is pretty good value. With red villainy, I like Fifth Brother. The raid 1, while it's damaged, can mean that it can act as a very powerful early attacking threat. I also like Force Choke. I think this is probably the best removal card in the game. Super efficient, does 5 damage, and even if it lets the opponent draw a card, to remove an early threat, again, early or late, Force Choke is always a great card to have in hand. Out of Red Heroism, I like Fighters for Freedom and Sabine Wren. If you're familiar with the Sabine aggressive strategies, you know that these 2 cards are staples. So if you like attacking, these 2 cards are great. And then we're going to wrap up with good mono villainy and mono heroism uncommons and commons. Starting with the Viper Probe Droid, 3/2, great stats for trading off early units, and looking at the opponent's hand helps you plan out accordingly. The TIE Advanced, 4 resources, 3/2, but then you also get 2 in the 2 experience tokens. Just make sure that you have enough Imperial units to play on them, but it's really, you get a lot of stats for 4 resources. I also like Cell Block card. It's only a 3/3, but the fact that Sentinel can be important. Again, it can keep you alive. It can protect your other units. Out of Heroism, I like Wing Leader for the same reason I like TIE Advanced. I really like Fleet Lieutenant. It's very efficient. It's a 3/3, but also allows you to attack with a unit, and if it has a Rebel, it gets +2/+0. Allows you to do multiple actions at once, helps you keep initiative. And I like Snowspeeder, a 3/6 ambusher, and the opponent will often have, will have a couple of ground vehicles, so being able to exhaust a vehicle ground unit can really delay the opponent's game. So I'd be looking out for Snowspeeders as well. Okay, so now that we have a sense of what good commons and uncommons to look for, now we can go into the strategy going into pack 1. And the strategy here is really for the first 3 picks, I would just draft the most valuable card in the pack. I wouldn't necessarily worry about trying to follow a particular color. You really want to be open here to any color pairing. So I like to speculate on the first 3 picks. I try to go for really powerful picks, cards that are bombs, that maybe I'll speculate on like build-arounds here. This would be a really great spot to get a Reinforcement Walker, for example, expensive card that can really make an impact on the game. And so long as you have drafted at least 1 heroism and 1 villainy leader, any card that you draft can be played without penalty, right? Since, again, you have access to all the colors, and you'll have access to heroism and villainy. You basically have access to all the aspects. So draft whatever you want in the first 3 picks. Now, as you get deeper into pack 1, starting with the 4th pick, and I used to say the 4th pick because this is going to be the pack that at least half the pod has seen. Remember that pods are about 8 people, so about the 4th pick, half of the pod should have seen the pack that you're about to see. You want to pay more attention to the aspects of this card that you draft. And that's because this might indicate an open lane. And open lanes are really the heart of any drafter, okay? So let's talk about what an open lane is, okay? A lane is just a specific aspect that a player is focused on drafting. So in Star Wars Unlimited, there will be a blue lane, a green lane, a yellow lane, a red lane, a heroism lane, and a villainy lane. Okay? An open lane is an aspect that other players in your pod are not focused on drafting. Okay? And once you suspect a lane is open, you're going to want to focus your ladder picks on drafting in this lane. All right? And packs that have been seen by more players will give stronger signals as to which lanes are open. So I know that was a lot. Let's talk about an example. All right? So let's say that on your 4th pick, you see that 4th choke is available. Okay? Let's say your first 3 picks have been, you had 2 heroism picks, one villainy pick, and the colors are blue, red, green. Then you see Force Choke on pick 4. Okay? If that's the case, then that means that at least that 3 other players have passed on Force Choke. Why would they pass on Force Choke? Well, while it's possible that those players saw a better red card or a better villainy card, chances are they probably saw better cards in other colors, which means they're going to be more directed to draft those colors. So that means there's a high likelihood that those 3 players before you have passed up red, and they've passed up villainy. So you want to start to think maybe villainy red could be an open lane, right? As you start looking at future packs, really pay attention to the red cards, pay attention to the villainy cards. If you start seeing some of those top cards that I mentioned, if you start seeing Fifth Brothers, if you start seeing Viper Probe Droids, if you start seeing TIE Advanced, then you will be then you'll have a stronger indicator that villainy will be an open lane, right? Now, to reiterate, going back to the leader strategy, if you only have heroism leaders, then you're screwed if villainy is the open lane, right? Because you're going to be penalized 2 resources for every villainy card that you play with a heroism leader, which is why it's super important that you have both villainy and heroism represented in your leader stable. Okay, so let's say you finished drafting pack 1. Let's say you did draft that Force Choke at the 4th pick. You suspect that red and villainy are open lanes. Now what do you do in pack 2? Well, you're going to continue to draft the best cards, but now you're going to put more value on the 1 or 2 lanes that you predict are open. So you're going to be on the lookout, you know, maybe you're more willing to pick a weaker red, a weaker villainy card, because again, you suspect that could be the open lane, and maybe there is some other color based off of the first 3 picks that you want to grab. Now, note that cards from blocked lanes in pack 1 will appear more frequently in pack 2. So for example, let's say you didn't see many good yellow or blue cards in pack 1. Well, that would mean that the players that were past you, the cards that you were passing to other players in pack 1, also didn't see many yellow or blue cards. So if they didn't see many yellow or blue cards, it's less likely that they're going to be drafting yellow or blue either, which means that in pack 2, those players who you passed to in pack 1, they're going to be passing you cards. So they're more likely to pass yellow and blue cards to you. Now keep in mind, if you were drafting the open lane in pack 1, then that means you are likely blocking those players from seeing your open lane, which means that the open lane, in this case, if it was Force Choke and red villainy, then it's likely that red villainy will also be passed to you for pack 2. And that's what we call reading and passing signals on draft, so that you can really carve out and making sure you can get a really good red villainy deck. Okay, by the end of pack 2, you should have solidified whether you play heroism or villainy, as well as your 2 main color aspects. Okay. So now, what happens when you get to the last pack? Okay, when you get to pack 3, you should be dedicated to filling out the weaknesses in your deck. Okay, so what should go into a draft deck? Well, your deck should have a mix of early plays, all right, cards that you can play in the opening. You want bombs. Bombs are cards that the opponent has to address, and if they don't address it, they're going. Those cards are going to lose the game. You also want finishers. Bombs are finishers, but finishers can also be cards like Surprise Strike. You know, cards that go over the top, cards with like Overwhelm, you know, that could be a finisher. You also want interaction and removal. You want cards that can address the opponent's threats. And Maybe you play one or two upgrades. Upgrades are typically difficult to play because they require that a unit is on the board, and you can't guarantee if a unit will be available. So typically you want upgrades to be a minimum. Okay. Now, you also need to consider your deck's curve. All right, and this is a really important concept. So we're going to spend an entire slide talking about what is a curve. Your curve is the ratio of the resource costs of all the cards in your deck. Now, an average solid curve for a Star Wars Unlimited draft deck might have, say, 3 to 5 1-cost cards and 7 to 9 2-cost cards. In other words, these are the cards that you can play on the first turn. And I've highlighted 2-cost cards because, at least in Magic drafting, cards that cost 2, in this case, mana, or 2 resources, are heavily prioritized. Not only are these cards, in this case in Star Wars, that you could play on the first turn, but these are also cards that are easy to play 2 of when you get to higher resource costs, or when you put more resources on the board. So when you get to 4 resources, it's really easy to drop 2 2-cost cards. Could you play a 3-cost and a 1-cost? Sure, but it's harder to get that combination of cards in your hand. Whereas if you stack your deck with a lot of 2-cost cards, it's really easy to get multiple 2-cost cards in your hand. All right, so I like to prioritize 2-cost cards. Then maybe you'll have 6 to 8 3-cost cards. These are cards that you can play on the second turn. 5 to 7 4-cost cards, and maybe 4 to 6 5 cards that cost 5 or more. Okay. Now, your ideal curve will depend on your deck strategy. Okay. Aggressive decks will have lower curves. So maybe aggressive decks will have maybe 8 to 10 2-cost cards and 8 to 10 3-cost cards. Maybe they don't even play cards that cost more than 5 resources. Control decks will have higher curves. Okay, of course you still want 2-cost cards, but control is going to focus on removing the opponent's cards. So we'll have maybe 3 or 4-cost removal cards, and then you're going to have more 5+ cards because you'll have higher quality units that will turn the game for you. Of course, mid-range decks will be somewhere in between. Now, different deck types will also emphasize different quadrants. And so there's an idea called quadrant theory, which I won't get into today, but this is going to be the subject of part 2 in this draft, I guess, video workshop lesson here. And we'll talk about how cards perform in the different types of stages, because they're basically 4 different types of stages that a draft game can go into. And so depending upon how cards perform in those stages can determine how you want to construct your deck. Okay? Now, with that said, I don't want to get too complicated. Let's talk about the recap for today's video. What are the main ideas that you want to have going into your draft? Number 1, make sure you have at least 1 heroism and 1 villainy leader in your stable. When you start drafting playables, start around pick 4 of pack 1. Be on the lookout for open lanes and really draft hard into those lanes. And as you draft, be conscious of your deck's curve. Make sure your deck has enough early plays to survive the opening, and then based on your strategy, you can decide whether you want to keep on playing cheap cards and try to win the game early, or do you want to play more expensive cards and try to outvalue your opponent. Okay, so that's the end of part 1. Thank you so much for watching this video. Be on the lookout for part 2, where we talk about quadrant theory. We're going to talk a little bit more about deck construction and how certain cards, despite being cheaper, might actually be better for your draft deck than more expensive cards. Okay? Anyways, may the Force be with you, and good luck on your next Star Wars Unlimited draft. Take care.